We now know who the Texans are going to play on Saturday, and let's just say it's another chance at revenge. Welcome into the channel. I'm Cody Stoots. Let's talk some Texans and Ravens. That's right, the Baltimore Ravens are the next opponent for the Houston Texans. They are going to host the Texans on Saturday for a 3:30 kickoff in Baltimore. That courtesy of the Bills defeating the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Texans, the lowest remaining AFC seed, they head to Baltimore to take on the Ravens. And of course, this is a rematch of a matchup between these two teams that started the season all 126 days ago, over 18 weeks ago. These two teams squared off to start the NFL season, and here they are facing each other in the playoffs. The Ravens were expected to be here. The Texans, well, they're surprising people, and they're going to try to surprise Baltimore on Saturday. Let's talk about that first matchup between these two teams. What happened the last time the Baltimore Ravens were the top seed in the AFC and didn't play in the first week of the playoffs? And, of course, we'll get in the Wayback Machine. We'll go to 2011 in a matchup between these two teams. Throw me a thumbs up on the video. Subscribe to the channel so we can get you all the playoff coverage this week here on YouTube. So the first time these two teams matched up, it was the season debut for both of these teams. First game of the year for the Ravens and the Texans. It was the first game for DeMeco Ryans as a head coach. It was C.J. Stroud's first game as a starting quarterback in the NFL. And I could go on and on and on and on and on, list you all the firsts in that matchup, but we'd be basically at game time on Saturday by the time we got through all of those. If you remember how that game went, it was just 7-6, a Baltimore lead at halftime against this Texans team. And then the Ravens really got going there in the second half. The Texans punted on the opening possession. Baltimore marched down the field and scored. The Texans couldn't convert a fourth down, which gave Baltimore a little bit of a short field. They scored again, and the Texans really never got anything else going on offense. They'd managed just 9 points in that matchup against the Baltimore Ravens. But again, it was 7-6 at halftime. And at the time, Baltimore was thought to be really good. Now, I don't know that you put a ton of stock in that matchup. In fact, I don't put hardly any stock in that matchup because these teams have evolved so much in the 120 or so some odd days since they played each other. Baltimore was working through a new offense, which may have led to some of the issues that they had in getting that thing started in the first half. The Houston Texans were all brand new. C.J. Stroud, we knew there were high expectations for him. We all felt pretty good about him, but we didn't know he was going to turn into a supernova and have one of the best rookie seasons ever as a quarterback. So I don't put a lot of stock in that matchup, but there are a couple of things from that I do want to point out in that game. And it was DeMeco Ryans' aggressiveness. And we continued to see it throughout the course of the season. He went for it on 4th and short a couple of different times in that game, once in the first half and once in the second half. And the Texans didn't get either one of them. The first play was a little bit convoluted, maybe tried to do a little bit too much with the window dressing, and ultimately the Texans turned it over on downs. And then the second time, if you can remember all the way back, the Texans hurried up to the line, then were stopped by the officials for a substitution. The Texans accidentally substituted on that one. It was one of those game operation things that was so tough early on in the season for the Texans. They've since worked out the kinks on all that stuff. They also had issues protecting C.J. Stroud. And if you'll remember last week against the Browns, Myles Garrett, one of the more ferocious defenses in all of football, C.J. Stroud was A-OK. This is not the team that I was hoping for the Texans to match up with. They're the team that I was pretty worried about the Texans playing, but ultimately you're going to have to beat good teams in the playoffs at some point. So this matchup against the Ravens is what the Texans have. I like their chances before we really dive in throughout the course of the week about this matchup. The Ravens have had some issues here or there with their offense over the course of the season. They're rolling pretty good right now. They've got the probable MVP at quarterback. They run the ball pretty well, and their defense is nasty. Now, the Texans just faced a nasty defense. It's a little bit different with Baltimore, those linebackers that the Ravens have. Patrick Queen and Roquan Smith, they're so good, and they're so dangerous. You got to watch out for them. The defensive line plays really well as well. So that's a really tough matchup for the Texans. It'd be tough if you were playing the Kansas City Chiefs too, though. So either way, this matchup is going to be a tough one. Just so happens you're at the top-seeded team in the AFC in the Baltimore Ravens. It's supposed to be a cold one on Saturday. It's supposed to be a little bit windy on Saturday. Now, who knows if the weather guessers are going to get that exactly right. D'Amico Ryans did mention on Monday it's nice that they get to get used to the cold weather with the cold weather in Houston this week. But ultimately, he said, who cares? Go make plays. So the weather not going to be an issue or a factor in the Texans, and they're certainly not going to let it be an issue or a factor. So the Texans at the Ravens, at the home of the likely MVP for the NFL, Lamar Jackson, and it'll be a big-time matchup between two of the emerging forces at the quarterback spot. I guess Lamar's not an emerging force. He is a force, but an emerging force in C.J. Stroud, an established force in Lamar Jackson. Those two squaring off along with some good defense, some impressive wide receiver play as well. Zay Flowers over on that side, Nico Collins on the Texans side. It's going to be a fun one. We'll dive deep into that matchup throughout the course of the week. I did want to talk about the last time the Baltimore Ravens had Lamar Jackson as the likely MVP and or the top seed in the AFC. Well, it was the 2019 season, and their first playoff game did not go their way, and it was in Baltimore, and it was against an AFC South team. That's right, Mike Vrabel and his Tennessee Titans went to Baltimore in the 2019-2020 playoffs and beat up the Baltimore Ravens. And when I say beat up, I mean they beat them up. The final score in that affair, 28-12. The Titans punched the Ravens in the mouth. They never really got off the deck. Lamar had a huge offensive day, over 350 passing yards. He ran the ball well, but he threw a couple interceptions and had a fumble in that game as well. So the turnovers hurt him. And the Ravens got upset as the top seed at home by an AFC South team. The Texans will look to do the same this weekend when, yet again, the Ravens were the top seed in the AFC, had a bye the week before, rested their players in the final week of the season, and had the MVP at quarterback. So maybe history repeats itself. The Texans are able to sneak by Baltimore. Look, they certainly can beat this Baltimore team. Nobody's unbeatable when you're this deep into the playoffs. It's not going to be easy, but they can beat this Ravens team. And I do wonder, knocking off a little rust after a rest to end the season and a bye week. I do wonder if the Ravens need to knock off a little rust here against this Texans team to get going. So trip down memory lane for the first game of this season, trip down memory lane for the last time the Ravens were the top seed and the MVP was playing quarterback for them, and trip down memory lane all the way back machine to 2011 when the Houston Texans went on the road for the first time in franchise history for a playoff game, and they faced, you guessed it, the Baltimore Ravens in Baltimore. T.J. Yates was the quarterback that day. The Texans couldn't really get anything going through the air. They played really good defense that day, allowed just 20 points to the Ravens, but the Texans couldn't put enough on the scoreboard in that matchup. An early fumble from Jacoby Jones set up the Ravens for a quick score. They jumped out to a little bit of a lead there on the Texans, and they never relinquished it way back in the day. So a little bit of exercise some current demons. Let me do my Ace Ventura. Exercise the demons of the first ever playoff loss all those years back and the loss from earlier this year. Of course, they got the Cleveland Browns in the revenge tour. The revenge tour continues potentially with the Baltimore Ravens on Saturday. So a little trip down memory lane for you as we get you ready all week long for the Texans and the Ravens on Saturday right here on the channel. Hope you enjoyed the video. Appreciate you watching. I can't wait till we preview all week long Texans and Ravens, and we talk Texans again soon.